A lot of small businesses have closed since the pandemic started, and many more have borrowed a lot of money to stay afloat. What's going to happen next? Ted's here to discuss it, starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Ted, welcome back. Debt Free in 30. That's the name of our show.
Right, I remember that.
You knew that? Okay. It's a show about helping individual Canadians deal with their debt. So why are we talking about small business?
Well, because they represent such a huge portion of our total economy. I mean, small businesses are half the labor force in the private sector?
Yeah, I actually did some show prep, and that's what I found out, that more than half of the private sector labor force, notice that word private.
Right. So not the government.
Right. So taking all those employees out. So more than half the private labor force are small businesses. So without those jobs, we don't have an economy, frankly, is what it works out. So if you go to the Industry Canada website, they define small business as a business that has 1 to 99 paid employees.
Makes sense.
And so in 2019, which is the last year they've got stats for, small businesses employed 8.4 million individuals, which is almost 69% of the total private labor force. So medium businesses were about 20%, large were about 11%. So that's a big chunk, obviously.
And that leaves what for the government? 9%?
Well, that's just of the private labor force.
20, 30. Yeah, okay, that adds to 100.
So I don't know. There's obviously a significant number there as well.
Right.
So according to a May 2021 survey by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, 71% of Canadian small businesses have taken on debt to cope with the impacts of COVID-19. Does that surprise you?
No, that makes perfect sense.
No, it does not surprise you.
Yep.
With additional borrowing hitting an average of $170,000.
Wow.
I know. It's like, good Lord, we got to talk about this. Now, one of the big chunks of that was Siba loans. Siba stands for Canada Emergency Business Account. So explain in general terms what the Siba loan was all about.
Well, so think back when they first put their package out to the public, the government offered $40,000 loans, repayable by December of 2022. A portion of that was forgivable to help small businesses. They increased that later to $60,000. So you could borrow a maximum of $60,000. If you repay $40,000 of that by December 31st of this year, $20,000 is forgivable.
Yeah, by the end of December of 2022.
22, I'm sorry, that's right.
So you've got more than a year to repay it. Now, before we started recording, you had this epiphany, which was what?
Right. Well, like any other debt that's forgiven, if you have a business and the debt is forgiven, the Revenue Canada treats that as taxable income. So that $20,000 is likely going to be taxed at whatever your marginal rate is. So expect you'll have to pay, well, if you're a corporation, $5,000. If you're an individual, it could be whatever your corporate tax rate is, whatever your personal rate is.
So there were a lot of business. Well, I don't know if there were a lot. I'll talk about numbers, but you are aware of people who said, hey, I might as well get the loan.
Yeah, anecdotally, I know people that took the loan, put it in some kind of investment. I know you go on, say
Bitcoin.
I knew you were going to say that. And their intention is to cash out the investment just before it's due to be repaid and repay the $40,000. And I don't think any of them have factored in the fact that they'll have to pay tax on the 20 plus tax on any gain that they've made on that money.
Yeah, and we are not tax experts, so whether if what we just said was wrong, we don't know. But it makes intuitive sense that if your income increased by $20,000, then it's probably taxable. So I went on to the government's website and did more show prep.
Right.
There were almost 900,000 businesses that got the Siba loan. And the total they received was just over $49 billion.
So that's interesting. They didn't all get the max then, because if you got the max, it'd be $54 billion.
Right. And obviously a bunch of them got the $40,000 and didn't apply for the top-up is presumably what happened.
Yep.
And according to that study from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and again, all these studies I'm quoting, I will put links to them in the show notes on YouTube, so you can fact check me if you don't believe any of this stuff. They said that there is $139 billion in COVID business debt. 76% of businesses say it will take greater than a year to repay the debt they borrowed to survive the lockdowns.
Right.
Only 39% of small businesses are making normal sales. In other words, back to where they were. 17% are still half or less of what their sales were. And this was back at the end of August is when that stat was done.
So what are the rest of them?
Well, I guess the rest of them are back to normal sales or never went down.
39% are making normal, 17 are less than half.
Right.
So I guess the other are somewhere between normal and half.
Or better than normal, I guess. So there are some businesses obviously that benefited. If you're the guy who makes masks, then you're probably doing fine.
If you could get your supply chain.
If you could get your supply chain, and we are gonna talk about that. So and again, not surprisingly, customer facing businesses tended to take on more debt than non-customer facing businesses.
Right.
So if you are a law firm, well, okay, you do everything remotely, probably no big deal. But if you are, a hair salon and had to be closed and then had to buy a bunch of, new PPE in that.
Right. And with limited ability to have customers come back in, I mean, there are all sorts of restrictions on lots of the businesses that actually deal directly with the public.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about the issues that you are hearing about from clients, because we get calls all day long from people with their stories. What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, you touched on this with the stats that you dug up. Debt is the biggest issue for all of them because they've all taken on more debt. That's the reason they're calling us. But they're also having problems actually making sales because they can't get any of the product. They can't get either the basic materials or they can't get the finished goods that they're reselling. They're calling that supply chain, right?
Supply chain.
It's all over the media.
Yeah, we never had a supply chain before, but now it's a supply chain. And it's not just one thing, it's multiple things.
Right.
So the company that I buy my stuff from, well, they had to shut down as well. Right. Or the company I buy from is way over there and it has to be shipped to me and the shipping is all gummed up.
Well, even if you're just a company that buys and resells stuff, you see it in the news all the time. You've got hundreds of ships sitting outside of ports as they can't get unloaded. Or the mask example that you gave, well, those guys could be making lots of money, but they've got to get the material to make the masks. They've got to get the packaging to put the masks together. They got to be able to ship the masks to market. All that stuff is being interrupted right now.
Yeah. So, okay, debt we talked about, huge problem, supply chain issues. What else?
Well, the next big one is labor. I mean, there are lots of folks that are telling me that they can't get their staff to come back to work. Part of it is that they're afraid. I mean, they have legitimate concerns about this pandemic. Other part of it is that they've been getting government allowance and they've adjusted their expenses to live on the government money.
Yeah, and I think it's been an eye-opener for a lot of people. So when you're on the hamster wheel, you just assume that, okay, I have to get up at 5 a.m. so I can be on the road by 6 to catch my bus and to get in the office. And,
right.
And so then when I had a period of time where I wasn't doing all that traveling and commuting and whatnot, it's like, my life is actually demonstrably better. So do I really want to rush back to work and go into an environment where the clients are all yelling at me, my boss is an idiot, and I don't feel safe because whatever the protocols are, they're not being followed or they're constantly being changed. And when you add up how much I actually make for working after subtracting my commuting costs, my daycare, my clothes, transportation, everything else, it's like, maybe, my spouse will continue to work and I won't. Maybe we'll both work part-time. Maybe one of us can work from home.
Right.
I'm not totally shocked that there's labor issues.
I still think all of that's going to wear off just like everything else. I mean, we're getting conflicting reports about the amount of pent-up demand out there. But I think we evolved into a culture and a society that operated in a certain way. And for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to operate that way. There's going to be an awful lot of pressure to get back to that previous lifestyle. Even the people right now that are sitting on their hands saying, I don't need that anymore. I'm guessing within 12 to 18 months, they're going to discover that they do need it and they'll be back to what they were doing.
Yeah, and I'm less convinced than you are.
Right.
I think we've gone through a permanent change. I kind of liken it to after 9/11, air travel changed permanently. So it used to be you got on the plane. Now you got to get there 2 hours early and go through this security and that, all these things. And there was a time you had to take your shoes off. I don't know if that's still a thing or
I think
not.
they're done with that.
They're done with that. Okay. And nobody actually ever blew up a plane with their shoes, but one guy tried to do it. So we all had to take it. So what you're saying is, okay, we'll come to the conclusion that you don't have to take your shoes off and things will go back to normal. And my opinion is, well, okay, maybe in that one example, things will go back to normal, but air travel never went back to normal. Yeah. So I think a lot of these things are permanent changes, but who knows? I guess we'll see. So let me give you some more numbers, then we'll get to the good part of the show. So Stick with us, people. June 30th, 2021 was the deadline for Siba loan applications. So you just talked about them. They're done.
Right.
CRB and CERB, which were the government benefits that went directly to people, they're now done.
Right.
They ended in October. We're recording this in November. Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy also ended October 23rd for most businesses. There will be funds for the Tourism and Hospitality Recovery Program and the Hardest Hit Business Recovery Program with some much tighter eligibility requirements. That'll be available until May of 2020.
Right.
So now to the controversial part of the show, Ted. And on the script here, I have nothing for Ted to say. So he's gonna wing this off the top of his head here.
Right.
Should the government continue these support programs until the economy is fully reopened?
Right. And I don't know what fully reopened means, so we could have a long discussion just on that. I am generally not supportive of government support programs, particularly when they go on too long, because they have this domino effect on the rest of the economy. So the sooner we're off these programs, I think the better. I'm a believer in the market forces adjustments.
Now, do you agree that the government had to do maybe not what they did, but they certainly had to do something at the start?
Well, it was they had to do something. And I think what they did was a little overboard, as evidenced by the numbers that we've got here. And we'll see what the ramifications of those are in the future.
Yeah, if the government says to a business owner, you cannot operate.
Right.
Okay, well, so how am I supposed to put food on my table if you are telling me I can't operate? It would have been one thing if they'd said, okay, you know what, free for all, maybe everyone will get COVID and die, but we're gonna leave it open. They didn't do that. And so by shutting everyone down, not everyone, by shutting many people down, they had to do something. So I think it's hard in hindsight to say they shouldn't have done anything, because then
That's right.
it would have been a disaster.
It's a question of degrees.
Right. And you're right. How do you decide when the economy is fully reopened? Well, if you look at things, many different statistics, the percentage of people employed, for example, or the unemployment rate would be another example. That's pretty much back to where we were pre-pandemic.
Right.
Now, the labor force participation, we can have that argument, I guess. But okay, if we're pretty much back to where we were, then do you require those supports?
Well, and how do you come off them? I mean, the government effectively canceled the larger ones by simply there was a due date, and they wound down on the subsidy one. I think that in the long run, we're going to find out that they've had a pretty deleterious effect on the economy, whether it's the stagflation that everybody's worried about right now or potential recession.
Yeah, we certainly don't know what the result is until the passage of time. So I guess we'll find out.
Somebody's got to pay back all this money that the individuals aren't going to pay back.
Not if you believe in modern monetary theory, they won't. So the Siba loans, you already explained it, the payback has to be before the end of December 2022, or else you end up having to pay the full amount back, and then interest will start to be charged. We know that there are 900,000 businesses who borrowed almost $50 billion on those loans. Do you think the government should extend the repayment period or give some kind of favorable terms to give businesses a bit more of a break?
I think they'll make that determination in the fall of 2022 when we see what economic growth and activity is like, and then they'll decide, well, do we need to be more generous, less generous?
Yeah, and they could certainly say, okay, fine, we're going to extend the repayment period, we're going to make a low interest. I mean, there's lots of different things they could do. So
that's right.
I agree with you. I think it's premature here, sitting in November of 2021, to be making a decision for 13 months in the future. Do you have any other advice for government? Any other things you think they should tweak? And you've already said that your bias is towards getting the economy open, and obviously in a safe manner, but not continuing to support everything. I mean, should there be extensions on things like when you have to pay your taxes, or the HST, or any other changes?
Well, the thing that has me more concerned than any of that doesn't seem to be getting a lot of press is somebody's got to pay for all these medical expenses that we're incurring. So, example, they've only just stopped the rapid test program that they sent out. They didn't stop it because they wanted to. They stopped it because they can't get the supplies to run it. At some point, we have to cover all of those costs as well, and all of the deferred health and medical things that have occurred or didn't occur while we were dealing with the pandemic. I think that's going to be a much larger problem than anybody realizes so far.
So stay tuned for 2022, and we'll see what happens.
Right.
Okay, let's go to practical advice here. So I am going to make up a case study off the top of my head.
Okay.
Which is really easy because I've had this call with numerous people.
Sure.
Okay?
Every day we take calls.
Every day. So a guy calls in, maybe it's a girl. Somebody calls in and says, hey, I operated a hair cutting place and I got shut down in March of 2020, and then I reopened and then I got closed. And I'm currently in a situation where I'm not operating at full capacity. I've lost a bunch of my clients because they're cutting their hair themselves. They're not getting it colored, whatever.
Yep.
But my rent is still there. I've got 3 more years left on my lease. And my landlord is saying, hey, we don't care if you shut down or not. You still gotta pay. And, you know, I realized there was a rent subsidy program. Initially, the landlord had to apply for it. So if your landlord didn't apply, too bad.
You didn't get it, yep.
But even at that, I still had to cover 25% of my rent, which is difficult when my revenue is 0. So I got the Siba loan. I've got the $60,000 that I have to pay back by the end of December 2022. But I've also incurred other debt. I had to use credit cards to survive and make my payments. So here I am sitting here towards the end of 2021. I don't know if business is going to come back fully or not. I've got all this debt that I incurred. What should I do?
Okay. Well, so if you can't see the forest for the trees, reach out and get some professional advice. Either your accountant, your lawyer. You can talk to folks like you or I. We'll need to get a fair bit of background information to be able to help you specifically, but don't get so frustrated with the whole picture that you just bury your head in the sand like an ostrich, because that's just not going to solve the problem. I mean, you famously used to say money problems don't go away, right? And
it's true. Money problems don't go away. Well, and it's very hard when you're in a bubble to see, as you say, the forest for the trees.
Right.
So, okay, you got to step back. And one way to do that is by talking to someone who is not you. Okay. So what are the kind of discussion topics you would have? So
there are 2 critically important questions that you ask everybody. And the first can be summarized as cash is king. Are you actually paying your bills as you incur them right now? So is there enough money coming in? Let's not worry about the long term. Is there enough money coming in this week to make the payroll, to pay the rent next month, to keep the lights on? Are you cash flow positive?
And this is a question we ask everybody, whether you're a business or not.
That's right. It's got nothing to do with, I mean, we're using it because we're talking about a business in this example, but this is what we ask every person that comes to see us. Have you got enough cash to pay your bills?
Yeah. If your rent is $2,000 a month and your paycheck is $1,800, then there's a problem.
Right.
And getting rid of all your debt is not going to solve that problem.
And so the cash is king discussion leads into the longer term one. Is the business actually viable? And we can relate that to individuals, but let's deal with the scenario that you've put out. So you've got a hair cutting establishment. The owner had all sorts of difficulties because of COVID, and we've all seen them. I mean, I remember, I booked ahead of time as soon as they were able to see people, just so I get my hair cut because it had been 3 or 4 months. Well, I guess I'm vain.
Ted is vain.
There you go.
As opposed to me, who shows up wearing a suit for an audio podcast, but okay, fine, whatever.
But if you can't answer the question of whether or not your business is viable, then we can't have any kind of discussion at all, because that means you don't know what the future holds. Well, you can tell whether or not, let's say you've answered the first question that yes, you're cash flow positive. So you can pay the bills that come up every week, every day. You're not getting any deeper in the hole. And so now the question is, well, how big is that hole? And is there enough coming off the cash that you can work your way out of it? And that's what it means to establish whether or not your business is viable.
And it's very difficult because, okay, so my hair cutting place, I've now got half as many clients as I used to have.
And you can't get the staff to come in and cut the clients that you still have.
So how do I know if it's viable or not? I don't know. Maybe more and more clients will return. Maybe my competitors will go out of business and I'll get some of their clients. Maybe I'll be able to find staff somewhere, but I just don't know. How do you determine the future when you don't have a crystal ball?
Right. Well, so most small business owners are fairly optimistic by nature. So they tend to think that things are going to get better, things are going to be okay. And I guess that's another question that we're asking you. So I'm asking if your business is viable. Part of that is, do you still want to be in business? Do you believe in your business? Because if you can't tell if it's viable, and you don't believe in it, well, I know what I'm going to tell you to do. Lock the doors and let's move on to something else. It's time for a new chapter in your life. If you don't know if it's viable, but you still strongly believe in the product and the service that you're providing, okay, that's still something we can work with.
Yep. And if you cut hair, well, you can go cut hair for somebody else. You don't have to be a business owner, but I understand the issue. So, okay, let's say I decide, you know what, I'm guessing it's not viable.
Right.
And so I want to explore the whole idea of shutting the doors. Now, I'm not planning to do that, but I guess I should understand it. So what are the kind of questions I need to ask at that point?
Yeah. So you need to know, is it a corporation? Is it a sole proprietorship?
And why is that important?
Well, so a corporation is a legal entity that's got separate liability and responsibility for certain types of debts. So for instance, the hair salon that you've rented, did the corporation sign a lease? And so if the company actually owes for the rent, not you personally. Now, most landlords are pretty sophisticated. They generally have the company sign for the lease and then they have the owners personally guarantee it. But that's something you want to check. It doesn't happen all the time. And it makes a big difference because if you're not personally liable for the lease, for the rent that's going forward, you could close the doors tomorrow.
Yep. And that's huge, what you just described there. So in the last week, I've talked to two people who operate hair cutting places. They are both incorporated. So the lease is in the name of the corporation. One of them has personally guaranteed it. One of them hasn't.
Right.
And the reason the second guy hasn't personally guaranteed it was he took over from the previous owner.
So the previous owner guaranteed it?
Yes.
Oh.
And this guy it was like a 10-year lease. The previous owner had only been there for 2 years. So this guy took it over and the previous owner had to stay on the lease. The landlord said, hey, we've already got the old guy on. We don't need the new guy.
Right.
So the old guy has personally guaranteed. This guy hasn't. So now if you've been in business for many years, maybe the landlord on the renewal says, okay, fine, I'm not going to do it. But being personally guaranteed is very important. Now, we mentioned Siba loans. So tell me about Siba loans, incorporated, not incorporated, personal guarantees.
So now let's extend that same comparison to a Siba loan. If you're a corporation and the corporation borrowed that $60,000, the corporation's responsible to repay it. Siba didn't take personal guarantees. So if you signed it as the president of the corporation for, Joe's haircutting service, then that's who owes the money, not you personally. Now, if you're a sole proprietor or you did borrow the money personally, again, that's another debt that you're on the hook for.
Yeah. And so we're not giving legal advice here. What I would strongly recommend you do is pull out the loan document.
Right.
Pull out the lease, read through it, have your lawyer look at it if you're not sure. The Siba loan documents we have seen, and we've seen a lot of them, were in the name of the corporation. There was no personal guarantee. So if your corporation shuts their doors, the government who guaranteed the Siba loan can't come after you. All of the Siba loans were made through banks. So you went to your bank to get it, but the bank has a backstop guarantee from the government. Now, if you're not incorporated,
then it doesn't matter. You're on the hook.
You're on the hook because you are the only entity there, in which case you will be liable to have it paid back. Now, what's the government going to do at the end of December 2022 if you haven't paid it back? I don't know. Tune in January of 2023 and we'll explain it to you. So the landlord, I think, is a huge issue for most businesses.
Yep.
What are the kind of questions then you want to ask? First of all, have I personally guaranteed it or not?
Right.
But then what else?
Well, what's the term remaining on the lease? So is it, you got 3 months left, you got 6 years left on it. And is there a clause that allows you to sublet the lease, which means basically assign it to somebody else? Usually there is, but it's got to be approved by the landlord. The difficulty being right now is that there'll be lots of businesses trying to do that.
Sure. If everybody in my industry is closed down, who's going to take over my premises?
Right.
And if they do, they're probably going to want to take over paying half the rent or something.
They're going to look for a deal.
Want some kind of special deal. So, okay, I've gone through this analysis and I've decided that, there isn't enough cash coming in. My business isn't viable. I'm on the hook for a bunch of this stuff. And, it is not possible for me to recover from this.
Right.
So then what? Obviously, they're talking to you.
Yep. Well, okay, so there's two elements to this too. There's the future element and then there's the current element. You've got to figure out what to do with that debt burden. So probably we're looking at possibly a proposal to your creditors or maybe even bankruptcy. I can't tell you which of those is going to make more sense without knowing a lot more information. I can tell you that more people are offering proposals than filing bankruptcy still these days. So they're finding a way to repay part of what they owe. But the other important part of this, and quite frankly, I think it's more important for you personally, is what's your plan B? Okay, I used to operate a business. I don't anymore. I still got to pay my personal rent. I got to put food on the table. So I need to know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And that's the part actually for you to focus on. Make the decision that we've got to do something to deal with this debt problem. And you go to a professional to deal with that. But really focus on how's your world going to be better? What are you going to do tomorrow? The debt plan is part of that.
For some people, that's very liberating because, well, I've been working at this business that I own and I've been bringing home virtually nothing. If I went and got a job at Amazon or as a delivery driver, I'd actually be making more money and I'd have no hassle. Right. I wouldn't have to worry about payroll and the government and PPE and all the rest of it. I would just show up and do it.
Yeah, your blood pressure would go down.
Exactly. You'd be better off. But that's a very difficult psychological thing.
The longer you've been working for yourself, the harder it is to go work for somebody else. And it's a completely different mindset of having to punch a clock versus
think about you and me. We started this company, I think it was 22 years ago, although my math might be wrong.
January 4th, 1999.
There you go. I think it was January 2nd, but we can check to see when Monday was in 1999. And I guess it would have been a Tuesday perhaps. So you and I are unemployable.
Pretty much.
So like who's going to hire somebody who's been their own boss for 22 years
right.
and now is going to have to take, direction from somebody else? We are unemployable.
It would be very difficult for us to transition to something else.
Yeah. So I guess we die in the chair here is probably what will happen.
We better make sure we don't go broke.
That's right. So it's not just about the numbers.
Right.
There's a whole lot more wrapped up, and your whole sense of self-being is, well, I'm the owner of this business as opposed to just being the employee. So right. You really have to get around that. And what I say to people is, look, let's compare A and B. Mm-hmm. So if you keep operating the business, here's all the money you're going to need to generate. Here's what you're going to need to do. If you were an employee, well, you'd get a paycheck and you'd have no stress. Is it really that bad? Particularly if you've only got 5 or 10 years left till retirement, right. Why not, fade into the sunset that way?
And if you're convinced that you can create a viable business, it may be that, okay, so Joe's hair salon had to die a horrible death. And you're going to go work for somebody for a while. And then you know what? You're going to restructure, put a new plan, and Joe's 2022 hair salon will open next year when you're in a better place.
Yep. And so often what will happen is exactly what you described, the old business dies, particularly if it's incorporated.
Right.
And I'll make the prediction now, those 900,000 people who got Siba loans.
It's not going to be pretty.
If they were incorporated, and it's like, well, I don't have the 60,000 or the 40,000 to pay back. That might be a business that just dies. Yep. And I start a new one. And, with a new landlord, new rent, whatever, it may be possible. It may be necessary though, personally, to do something if I'm on the hook.
Likely.
And that's the trick. So you got to step back and make the decision. And it's not easy and it's not a simple thing to do. So we're going to do our 2022 prediction show.
But not today.
Not today. It will air on New Year's Day, 2023. So you can all mark your calendars for that. But it'll be. Oh, you're right. We're in 2021 now. I don't even know what year we're in anymore. So a couple of months from now, it will be airing. But give us, what do you think 2022 is going to look like now? We'll get into more detail when we do the actual show, but what's your gut feel?
I think the big wild card in all of this for the economy, for society in general, is what is the government going to do in the spring? They've been printing money, handing it out hand over fist, and I think the bill's got to come due. So CRA's got to get back to work, and then they got to start actively collecting. They're starting to do some of that now, but not nearly at the levels that they were pre-pandemic and not nearly at the levels that they're going to have to do to deal with all of these government programs that have expired.
Yeah, so my gut feel is it's going to be a long, slow road back.
Right.
CRA is currently, they're all working from home. So the level of collection activity that they're able to do is a lot less than it used to be. And that's both for personal and business.
Right.
So maybe optimistically, they're able to start returning to the office in January. Maybe March. Mm-hmm. I don't know when exactly it will be. Maybe it's 1 or 2 days a week to start. Maybe they can then start issuing requirement to pay notices and putting liens on things and getting that going. The other bill collectors, same thing, a gradual return. I think tax season in 2022 will be really when the tale is told, because you got people who got CERB in 2020, who got CRB in 2021, and had some taxes but not full taxes paid on it. And with CRB, which a lot of business owners would have drawn on because they, had their income reduced.
Well, there's the means test, right?
Right. So if your total income for 2021, I believe the number's 38,000, but don't quote me on it.
After expenses, 38,500.
Yeah. And if you, not including what you got on CRB, if you're over that limit, then what you got in CRB starts getting clawed back.
Right.
So half of what you got in it's clawed back 50 cents for every dollar. So you may end up with a situation where, okay, I got back into my, I did some work early in the year. I was locked down. Then I came back to work in September, worked for 4 months, did pretty well, made more than the 38,000. Guess what? My tax bill is going to be a lot higher than I thought next year as well. Right. And when you add in my tax bill from 2020, which I haven't paid yet, it could be serious.
And the government hasn't told any of us just what the tax bill for people's looked like in 2020.
Right.
I mean, by now, most of us have filed, and there should have been assessments. And so what was the difference? How many of these people got CERB in 2020? Yep. And what do they owe? Nobody's talking about any of that.
Nope.
And somehow we got through an election with it.
Yeah,
anyway,
I know. It's
what
a shock. What a shock. Sometimes things are not as they appear, Ted.
Really?
That's how it works. Well, people are watching this going, I wonder what's in their coffee mugs. Nothing. They're empty. They're just props, people.
How are they watching? I thought this was a podcast.
It's an audio-only podcast. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of things we don't know.
Right.
And so I think it'll be a very surprising year because there'll be a lot of unknowns. So bottom line then is, I guess you got to take stock now.
Right.
And if you don't think your business is viable going long term, are you not better off to just pull the plug now and deal with the consequences and get on with whatever plan B is?
Yep. Do the cash is king test first. It says if it costs you $1 every day you stay open instead of you making $1, then closing sooner rather than later makes sense. If you pass the cash is king, you can pay the current debts, but the business isn't viable. So now you can take some time to plan for the future. So you've got to make that basic assessment. Am I making things worse by staying open? And how much worse am I making them?
Yeah. And then if you can make that decision, it makes it a little easier. But again, that's why people call us up and we sit down and go through with it.
That's what we do for a living.
My final comment on all this is exactly to echo what you said. I don't think it makes sense to be operating a zombie business for a year or two when the result is inevitable. You would be better off cutting your losses now. But again, that's a decision each person has to make. I think the other key point here is that operating a business is very difficult.
Right.
It's not easy. Something like 80% of businesses go out of business within the first 5 years. There are very few 100-year-old businesses that are still operating today. It's just
they're
not
certainly
a thing.
not being operated by the people that started them.
That's probably true. That's probably true. So operating a business is difficult. There's a whole lot of challenges. And if you've never operated a business, you don't fully grasp it, just like I don't fully grasp what it's like to play hockey in the NHL because I never did that. I think I know what it's like. I played hockey. No, it's totally different. You've got the pressures on all sides.
Right.
Am I going to be able to meet payroll? Am I going to be able to get my product? Can I sell it for enough? What about that customer who's threatening to sue me? What about this? What about that?
Right.
There's so many different things that you have to worry about that you don't have to worry about when you're an employee. And then when you combine that with the fact that I was locked down, I've now had to incur all this other debt, it's very difficult.
Right.
So I empathize with everyone in that situation. I think you got to do the analysis, reach out and come up with a plan. That's really all you can do.
Makes sense.
There you go. So those are our thoughts on small business. If you've got those issues, reach out to a professional. The sooner you deal with them, the better. That is our show for today. Thanks to all for watching. If you are actually watching this on YouTube, then you know I'm wearing a suit. Please, by all means, leave a comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. That helps us with the algorithm. If you're listening on to the audio version on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, leaving a review is also very helpful. Thank you very much for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. For Ted Michalos, that was Debt Free in 30. Okay. Well, should we just do the trailer too?
Might as well. So, changed it on here. I saw that was great.
I can't. Yeah, unless you have something else you want to say.
No,